40,000 years ago, somewhere in southern Europe, the last Neanderthal died. We don't know who it was. We don't know if it was a man or a woman, if they died alone or surrounded by others, if they understood what they were losing. We only know that after that moment, a species that had walked this planet for 400,000 years was simply gone. And for a long time, we told ourselves a comfortable story about why. We were smarter, we were faster, we were better. We outcompeted them the way evolution always works, and they faded into the past the way failures do. It was clean. It was logical. It made us feel like we had earned our place at the top. But that story is wrong. The truth is that for thousands of years, we lived beside them. We traded with them. We fought alongside them. We had children with them. And the reason they disappeared is not as simple or as flattering as we once believed. So what would the world look like if they had survived? Let's start with what most people still get wrong. The Neanderthal in your head is probably a hunched, grunting brute, more animal than human, dragging a club through a cave. That image was built by a single skeleton found in France in 1908 by a scientist who assumed the fossil must have walked like an ape. He was wrong. The skeleton had arthritis. He had been reconstructing a hunched elderly man and calling him a species. The actual Neanderthal was built like a professional wrestler. Short, dense, enormously strong, with a brain slightly larger than yours. Not slightly smaller, larger. They buried their dead in carefully dug graves. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologists found a Neanderthal burial surrounded by pollen from at least 8 species of wildflowers. Someone had placed flowers on the grave. Scientists still argue about whether it was intentional ritual or coincidence. But the grave itself was not an accident. They cared about their dead. They made jewelry, wore pigment on their bodies, and played music. Neanderthals and modern humans did not simply pass each other in the night. They lived alongside each other in Europe and the Middle East for somewhere between 2,600 and 5,400 years. Think about that number. The United States is 250 years old, and the Roman Empire lasted roughly 500 years. 2 species of intelligent tool-using humans shared a continent for potentially more than 5 millennia, and they did not stay on opposite sides of the valley. In 2010, when scientists first sequenced the Neanderthal genome, they found something that stopped the field cold. If your ancestry is non-African, between 1% and 4% of your DNA right now is Neanderthal. Not in some distant ancestral sense. Physically, in every cell of your body, you are carrying fragments of them. They are not gone, they are inside you, which means the extinction wasn't clean. It was a long, slow merger, a blend that leaned so heavily toward Homo sapiens that Neanderthals eventually disappeared as a distinct category. Not killed, absorbed. So why did the balance tip? The honest answer is that we don't fully know. 3 theories compete, and all of them are probably partly true. The first is climate. Europe 40,000 years ago was lurching violently between extremes. Cold snaps could drop temperatures by 10 degrees in less than a generation. Neanderthals were built for cold, but even they had limits. Their populations were already small and fragmented. The second is competition. When modern humans arrived in Europe, they came with something Neanderthals didn't have: large-scale social networks. We were trading shells and flint across hundreds of miles. We were coordinating hunts with groups we'd never met. Neanderthals, for all their intelligence, appear to have lived in smaller, more isolated bands. When resources got scarce, smaller networks lost. The third is disease. Modern humans coming out of Africa would have carried pathogens Neanderthals had never encountered. The same thing that devastated indigenous populations in the Americas may have happened in Pleistocene Europe, quietly, without anyone understanding what was wiping them out. Now take all of that, hold it in your head, and change one variable. The climate stabilizes slightly earlier, or the disease doesn't reach a critical Neanderthal population in time, or one isolated group in the mountains of southern Spain, where the last genetic evidence of them appears, survives long enough to expand again. A band of 50 becomes 200. 200 becomes 1,000. The window closes and they're still here. What happens next? The first thing to understand is that there would not be peace. Not right away, and maybe not for a long time. Two cognitively capable species competing for the same prey, the same caves, the same firewood in the same harsh winters. That is not a recipe for harmony. The history of modern humans encountering other humans with slightly different cultures and technology is not a history of gentle curiosity. It is a history of war, displacement, and domination. The Neanderthals that survived would have survived because they were the strongest, the most organized, and the most dangerous. But here's what's fascinating. We know from the genetics that even during the period of overlap, the two groups were interbreeding. Not occasionally. Regularly enough to leave a permanent mark in the modern human genome, which means that whatever violence existed between them, it existed alongside something far more complicated. Look at what happens when two groups of modern humans, genetically nearly identical, share a resource-scarce environment. Now imagine that divide is visible. Imagine the other group has a different brow ridge, a different build, a different voice. The things humans have done to each other over differences of language and skin would have been directed at something far more visibly distinct. This is the part of the thought experiment most people skip over because it's too uncomfortable. A surviving Neanderthal population would almost certainly have encountered slavery. Not as a metaphor, as a policy. And yet, set the violence aside for a moment, because the question underneath all of this is the real one. What were they actually capable of, given time? Neanderthals were already doing things that look like the beginning of symbolic thought. The cave at Cueva de los Aviones in Spain contains perforated shells and mineral pigments, likely used as body paint, dated to 115,000 years ago. That is 65,000 years before modern humans arrived in Europe. They were decorating themselves when we were still in Africa. In Bruniquel Cave in France, deep underground, 300 meters past the cave entrance, Neanderthals built circular structures from broken stalagmites. The structures are 176,000 years old. Scientists still don't know what they were for. They weren't shelters. They weren't traps. They were built in total darkness, deep in the earth, for reasons nobody has fully explained. That is not the behavior of a creature on the edge of awareness. That is ritual. That is meaning. That is a mind that thinks in terms of things that cannot be eaten or worn. Here's the question that changes everything else. Did Neanderthals have language? The hyoid bone, the small bone in your throat that makes complex speech physically possible, has been found in Neanderthal skeletons, and it is shaped identically to yours. Their ear canals were tuned to the same frequencies as modern human speech. They had a version of the FOXP2 gene, the gene most directly linked to language capacity in the human brain. Whether they had full syntactic language, the ability to nest clauses, to talk about yesterday and tomorrow, and what might have been, we cannot know. But the anatomy says they could have, and the behavior suggests they were at least pointing in that direction. A surviving Neanderthal population, given 40,000 more years, given the same pressures of a changing climate and an expanding world that forced us to develop agriculture and writing and cities, there is no reason to assume they would have stayed in the caves. There is every reason to think they would have built something. We just don't know what. Think about what a second intelligent species on this planet would have meant for science. Every question we ask about consciousness, language, and what makes us human would have a comparison point. Right now, we are trying to understand the human mind using only one example, us. It is like trying to understand what a star is by looking only at the sun. A living Neanderthal population would have been the most important scientific subject in history. Not as research subjects, the ethical catastrophe of that is obvious, but as a parallel data set. Their medicine, their psychology, their social structures, their cognitive blind spots and breakthroughs. All of it would have told us something about ourselves that we currently cannot see. We would have known for certain whether consciousness requires language, whether symbolic thought requires a particular brain structure, or whether it emerges from any mind complex enough to be bored. Whether religion is a uniquely Homo sapiens invention or something deeper, something that surfaces in any brain capable of contemplating its own death. And here is the question nobody wants to answer. What counts as human? Right now, that question is easy. There is one species of thinking, speaking, tool-using primate on Earth, and we give it rights by default. even when we fail to honor those rights in practice. But put a second species in the frame, and everything becomes harder. Do Neanderthals get legal personhood? Do they vote? Do they have the right to their own land, their own culture, their own political representation? Do we give them citizenship, or do we build reservations? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They are the exact questions that would have had to be answered. The same way every society has had to answer who counts and who doesn't. And if history is any guide, and it is, the answer would not have come easily or generously. The group with more coordination, more numbers, and more institutional power would have written the rules first. The other group would have fought for every concession. We already know how that story tends to go. 40,000 years ago, the last Neanderthal died. We don't know why. We don't know where. We don't know if anyone mourned them, if anyone even understood what was ending. We only know that the world got quieter afterward. One kind of mind stopped asking its questions, stopped building its structures in the dark, stopped placing flowers on its graves. But they didn't fully disappear. They left fragments of themselves inside us. In your immune system, in the thickness of your hair, in traits we are still cataloging and still don't fully understand. They are inside you right now. The species that almost made it, still running quiet routines in the background of your biology.